Welcome into episode number 5 of the Real Wisdom Podcast, where every week I take a deep dive into the trenches of the film and television industries. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and if you haven't yet, friendly reminder to check out last week's episode where I had the pleasure of interviewing documentary filmmaker Jeffrey Morgan. It's one of those shows that as soon as we were finished, I felt extremely proud. Not only proud of Jeffrey for coming on the show to tell his story and about the making of the documentary, but I was also proud of myself for taking a step forward in having a different type of conversation on this particular podcast. And we're going to continue that on this week's show because we're going to be talking about another documentary called Men Behind Closed Doors: Stories for Survival. And it delves into the rarely discussed issue of men who were victims of domestic violence. And you're going to be hearing from the director of the documentary, Kurtz Frausun. And if that name sounds familiar to longtime listeners of the Derek Diamond Experience, and even, in the early incarnation of this show, I actually interviewed Kurtz back in early 2015, and I hate that I didn't have this pulled up during the interview, but if you want to go back and listen to our original chat, it is episode number 41 of the Derek Diamond Experience, and it aired January 8th, 2015, almost 10 years ago, which is mind-blowing to say. And I mentioned this in the conversation, but the timing of this episode was perfect. I said in the conversation almost perfect, but I will correct myself and say that it's perfect because around the time that we completed the interview with Jeffrey Morgan, Kurtz reached out to me and said that he had just released this documentary and wanted to know if I wanted to do an episode on it. And I almost immediately sat down and watched it. And I was blown away by just the raw emotions that this invoked throughout all 60 minutes of it. So I knew I absolutely wanted to have Kurtz on the show to talk about it. And he talks about his own experiences and how those led to the making of this. And it even brought up buried memories from myself. And I delve into it a little bit in the conversation, but I was also in a mentally abusive relationship when I was in college. And it messed me up for a long time. I still can feel the lingering effects of it. I will say that I'm much better now. Of course, I'm married, have been for over 2 years now. I feel like I'm in the best place mentally that I've been in my entire adult life. But there was a time that I was not. And this, I couldn't help but reflect on it after watching this documentary. But I can't say enough about the courage that it took for Kurtz, as well as the men who were brave enough to tell their story, because it is true. This is a topic that isn't really talked about. I can't remember the last time I ever had a discussion about it, to be perfectly honest. So in carrying over the conversation from last week, we're going to say this week too, there are a lot of issues going on in the world, and we're not going to solve them unless we talk about them. So we get into, we do a deep dive on this documentary and what Kurtz wants to accomplish with this now being out in the open. And it's on YouTube. I'll include a link to it in the show notes for everyone to watch. And one last thing I'll throw out there before we turn it over to the conversation with Kurtz. This episode does have some pretty strong language. I know cursing's normally not a normal part of the podcast, but I told him this before we did the interview. When I bring guests onto my show, I want them to be themselves. If they curse, then have at it. If you don't curse, that's perfectly fine too. So I will say, I guess to use the old TV adage, viewer discretion is advised. If cursing is something that bothers you, then maybe this episode isn't for you. But just wanted to throw that little nugget of information out there. But without further ado, here is my conversation with Kurtz Frausun. Happy to welcome Kurtz Frausun back on the show. Kurtz, how are you?
Doing great, man. How you doing?
Good, good. I know we've been talking for a few minutes here before we've actually started recording, catching up because you were actually one of the first guests that I had back on the Derek Diamond Experience days back, I believe it was 10 years ago,
Yeah.
which is insane to say, but we've stayed connected through Facebook over the years, and really proud of what you've been doing, especially a documentary you recently released that we're going to be talking about here shortly.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back, and I've been watching your show, and yeah, real proud of you. It's been
No, I
great.
appreciate that. So, for those that might be new to the show, I use this analogy all the time in saying that there's not like a how-to guidebook on how to become a filmmaker. Everybody just they kind of find their own unique way. Like the industry finds them; they don't necessarily find it. So, what drew you into wanting to become a filmmaker in the first place?
Well, I grew up in a home where classic films were really important. My folks were really into, it, especially my dad. And I'm watching, Laurence Olivier and Peter O'Toole, and I saw, Lawrence of Arabia, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's like watching a breathing painting. This is amazing, and it kind of planted a seed right there. And then in my early 20s, I branched into painting, and I was a painter about 5 years professional, 10 years in total, and then branched into music. And as I was doing music, what always comes with music? Videos. So as I started doing these videos, I was like, wait a minute, I think I could do like a movie. I think I could do a short film. I could do something like that. And so it kind of branched into that. And so it was fantastic because those 10 years as a painter, when I use the camera, I try to consider it as a brush. So I'm actually painting the scene literally in the way that I like to move. Even if I'm at I don't care if I'm at a protest, I'm doing an interview about a very difficult, painful subject. I still like to consider it as a paintbrush and a palette and creating something on there. So that's just kind of how it started in my youth. And then as it kind of grew, it just sort of slept and then it just emerged.
I love hearing your passion and your love for the classic films and the fact that you grew up on them, because I wasn't exposed to a lot of them until I became like a teenager and then into college. Once I decided that film was ultimately what I wanted to do, I just immersed myself in those classic films from the fifth, especially like the 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s.
Oh, yeah.
They really they're almost like teaching tools, because you see how they were like these brilliant pieces of art, because I consider film to be an art form, were made back then with not nearly the technology that we have today.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, if you look at you look at like Fritz Lang, you look at Orson Welles. I mean, digging out holes in the floor to get the camera angles and the right framing, and even Fritz Lang with Metropolis. I mean, creating like handmade sets, and then I mean, early Ray Harryhausen, and then into Ray Harryhausen and handmade animation, and all of these things. Jason the Argonauts, all this. It's such a work of art. Like silent films have disappeared, all this stuff. I mean, it is a true work of art. And I mean, I'm not an all a Tarantino fan. I know that's controversial, but he's controversial enough. But I do not care for Tarantino. However, he did say something once where he said, I believe, to paraphrase, I didn't go to film school. I went to the movies, and that's kind of how I like to see it. And I never felt a need to go to film school and be told, oh, well, this is how you frame a shot. It's like, yeah, well, fuck you. This is what I think is cool, man. I like the fact that it's kind of off angled, it's blurry in the corner, it's a little shaky. Okay, no one's going to tell me that's wrong. I think it works. So,
And that's what's great about film, is that it can be what you want. And
exactly.
even in kind of going to painting, there's so many different styles. You've got your Van Goghs, you've got your Rembrandts, you've got so many different styles. Film would be so boring if everything looked the same, was shot the same, was acted the same. That's one of the reasons why I love it, is that you can. Yeah, I know you said you're not a Tarantino fan, but I'll use him as an example.
Yeah.
You can watch a Tarantino film and it's going to be way different than a Christopher Nolan film or a
Right.
Spielberg film. So there's something for everyone, and as a creator, you can discover your style, and you can make it your own. That's what's so great about it. You can make it whatever you want.
And I admire that about film, even though I'm not a fan of his. I mean, there's directors I think are brilliant, and like Herzog, I think is genius. And there's other directors I don't care for, but I'm glad they're there. I mean, it's almost like it almost aligns itself with my views of the First Amendment. The true defenders of the First Amendment are those that support the rights and the voices of those that they disagree with, because the principle is more important. The principle and the beauty of film to me is more important than my personal taste. No, I'm not going to see the latest Marvel film. I'm not going to bash it online. I'm not going to talk about it. It's just like not my thing. But that's fine, and I'm glad we live in a world where that's possible. Because if you say this is the only way, then you might as well create films for North Korea. Because if you look at their style, it's all the same thing. Look at 60s and 70s Russian propaganda films. All the same. It's workers who are working and they are happy. They're in the field and everything is good. Well, that's why I love like Russian experimental cinema, and it's just underground cinema. They just said, "No, that's bullshit. Fuck you. We're going to show what it's really like, and it's pure insanity, and we're hungry and we're drunk." And I like that.
Yeah. No, and that's a great way to learn too, is to study the different styles, even if it's something that you don't like. Like you said, like with Marvel, you're not going to go see it, but you understand kind of why it's there, and that there are people that enjoy it. Yeah. I'm the same way with certain films. Like I may not watch it because I know I'm not, like, it's not my thing, but I'm glad it's there, like you mentioned with the directors.
Exactly. And I think it's done with the same way. Like, I don't like silly humor a lot. I like dark humor. I like, different kinds of humor. I don't like silly, dumb humor. But at the same time, it's like, man, I'm in the mood for something stupid. And I'm glad that exists. And it's a beautiful thing to have that in this world. I don't think there should be any limits on film and photography and creativity in that way. It should be done as an exploration, because there's going to be an audience. And at the same time, there's going to be someone who's going to hate it and combat that by going, I'm going to do something better. Because just think about how many great films have been made because some young director saw a movie and said, that's what's popular? Fuck you. I'm going to do something different. And I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. So, mentioning your most recent film, which you were gracious enough to send me the link to it, and I watched it, almost immediately. It's a documentary called Men Behind Closed Doors: Stories for Survival. And I will say, on kind of a side note, the timing of this was almost perfect, because I just interviewed a filmmaker based out of New Jersey who made a documentary about my hometown.
Oh,
and
cool.
Kind of the racial unkindness that's part of its history. And there was a shooting that happened back in 2010. Not to get into the whole thing, but the documentary, like, I had just done the interview with him when you reached out to me and sent me the link to this. So, like, the timing was just so perfect. So, tell me about what inspired or motivated you to make this.
Well, first of all, I'll say is I saw the trailer to unfortunately I don't recall the gentleman's name, but I saw
Jeffrey Morgan.
Yeah, trailer to that film, fucking amazing, like gorgeous.
It gave me goosebumps.
I was like, and I tell you, it's perfect timing also, because just as I use the example of saying watching a film saying, that sucks, I can do better. I watched that going like, I need to up my game. I mean,
same.
I was like, it's like, I wish I had access the way he had access. That's beautiful. But I mean, the trailer was gorgeous. But yeah, great work of art. What inspired me for my film?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a few years ago, I had been through a abusive relationship, and it was bad. I mean, I've been in previous situations where there was conflict. I was like, that's a little heated for how it should be. But this was terrifying. And after going through it, I just said, you know what? I'm just going to okay, I'm moving on. I'm in a better place. I'm happily married. Things are good. That's my past. But I could not get it out of my head. And during that time, for my own personal safety, I recorded video of the abuse. And I did that because I was constantly threatened with, well, who do you think they're going to believe if I call the cops? I was like, I might spend a night in jail because of accusation, but I have proof that I'm 10,000% innocent, and her ass is going to be in jail. Well, I held on to this stuff, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this, but you know what? I'll just keep it. And then I kept thinking more and more, and I started reading more articles about men who have been abused. And I had some friends come out to me and talk about it. Like I didn't know where to go. I had no one to talk to. There was no availability for anything. They only took care. They would only cater to women and children. If you're a guy, you're on your own. I was like, wait, there might be a story here. And Carl Sagan, one of my favorite quotes from him that I always apply to film is the greatest moment in science is not eureka, but that's interesting. Every single thing that I work on, every single thing I create always comes down to one simple fact. I look at something and go, fuck, man, that's interesting. All this is what's been told. What's this shadow story? And so I figured, wait, I'm coming from a place as a person who has gone through this and made it out alive and survived. And a lot of men have not. And so I started putting out the word and started to get some feelers out. Well, the right kind of people reached out to me, some amazing men who were starting support groups for guys. And it blossomed from there. And it had to deal with a lot of hate. And it was all from guys. It was like, why do you want to touch these? Why do you want to talk to these fucking pussies? Why do you want to talk to these soy boys? Fuck those cunts. I'd never let a woman talk to me like that. It's like, okay, but you don't get the story. And so I started to piece their stories together, and I tried to do a bit of an experimental style, sort of a dream. That's why the cutaway scenes when they're speaking, that stock footage is meant to look like it's written on paper, because while I was in the middle of it and after, I wrote a diary about my experience as what I was going through. So I wanted the whole thing to reflect a dream sequence. And then, of course, at the end, I kind of came out of the closet and just explained what I'd been through. And so that's my very long-winded explanation. Sorry.
No. That's perfect. And you actually answered one of my first follow-up questions. Is the style in which the documentary was made was very unique, and it was very much like a dream sequence, like a lot of contrast with black and white, but that makes a whole lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, because a lot of the three men I spoke to three men who were victims. I spoke to a man who, pardon me, used to be a victim, but now he helps other men. Then another man who was an abuser that helped other men. Then a victim who is actually a men's rights activist. So, and then there's my story. And each one of them had something different to tell. And I remember going through my old notes, the video I had shot, and everything I had done for my own protection and proof that I'm not fucking the person that I'm being told I am. As I was going through all of that, I'm like, this is like a dream, man. And so I just started putting it together and deliberately doing it in that style. But experimental film is one of my favorites. But if I can tell a strong story and yet at the same time give it that kind of vibe and energy that reflects the mindset and the dreamlike illusion of what you're experiencing, even though it's reality, that's the way to do it.
Well, I think especially in the opening credits, when you have these kind of like moving images with the kind of like the smoke coming in, it really captures that like dramatic feel to it, and the music that's behind it. I remember sitting there watching it, and I'm like, "Oh my god, this is going to be intense." So like, it captures you immediately, and I think with something like this, you want to grab the audience's attention to let them know, hey, this is a serious topic.
Yeah, it's not something to fuck around with.
Right.
And that phone call in the beginning where I called and said, do you offer services for men? No, I'm sorry, we don't click. I mean, that was, there was one story that I did not include in that film where I was really in a bad place. I was at work on my lunch break. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I truly don't know what I'm going to do. I have nowhere to go. My family lives way out of state. I've got a job. I've got an apartment. But I've got to maintain this. What do I do? What do I do? And I called the crisis hotline. And the woman, I picked up the phone. I said, first and foremost, I'm going to make it very clear. I'm not suicidal. I am not going to harm myself or anyone else. but I am in a nightmare situation and I just need to talk to someone. And she said, well, where are you? I said, I'm in Dallas. And she said, I'm sorry, but we only have women-based centers there. Click. And I was like, it was so fucking insane to me that I burst into laughter. And I was like, oh, fuck this. I'm stronger than this, man. I'm getting up. I'm getting up. Get up. Like one of my favorite quotes from Terminator when I'm feeling down is when Reese is told, on your feet, soldier. And when they're in the factory, I'm just like, on your feet, soldier. I'm like, all right, let's do this. We're going. Move. Take the hill.
You reacted much differently than I would have, because I'm like, my basic thing is like, it's not a gender thing. It's a human being is in a bad place,
right,
and they need help, and to just hang up. Oh my God, what the hell?
It's true though. I mean, and I had somebody else on LinkedIn when my film got picked up by a couple of people and started getting shared, and a woman chimed in saying, yeah, well, what about women? I'm like, that's not the point of the film. The point is not to create a division between men, women, gay, straight, trans, bi, non-binary. It's not the point. The point is to say, we suffer too. We need help too. That's the point of the film, is to bring to light the shadow truth. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this. Not to create division, but unity. This isn't a woman's issue. I've had plenty of female friends who have been in abusive situations. I didn't question it. I was like, whatever you need, let's go, get you to safety now. But I'm saying men have a harder time coming out and expressing and dealing with this. And yes, women are more likely to be killed in abusive situations. Men are more likely to commit suicide, become addicted to drugs or alcohol, self-harm, or do anything that leads them down a path that gets them away, and even if that means death. And that just needs to be addressed. We're not saying like, give us all your money because we need help too. The film is trying to say, hey, this is not a divisive issue. This is a unity issue against pieces of shit that abuse other people solely because they're hurt and they react and kick the cat.
No, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's something I wanted to ask you too about. You mentioned finding these men who were brave enough to tell their story in a recorded format. How did you get them, comfortable enough to open up to you to share their stories?
Well, the first thing I would always do is I'd call them on the phone and I'd be like, hey, it's me, it's Kurtz, and want to do the talk. And as we were talking, they'd be like, okay, let's talk. And I could read their kind of vibe and be like, okay, they're not too receptive to this just yet. I'd be like, hey, let's not talk about this. Let's take a break. And so some of the calls were like 2 hours long, but that's because we spent time talking about their dogs. And if you keep people relaxed and cool, they go, oh yeah, I'm good now. And I did one of my first documentary I ever did called Candid Love about a gay couple in Plano. It was done in 2015. It was about a gay couple in Plano where one of the men, his father had just died. And they are dealing with abuse from each other, addiction, self-harm, and then the father dies and it just becomes a nightmare. And I remember interviewing the gentleman whose father had passed away, and he's like, I can't do this. I said, all right, fuck it. We're not going to do it. And he's like, what? I was like, he goes, but you came all this way. I was like, I know, I'm not saying the whole thing's off the plate. It's not off the table. I'm saying, fuck it. Let's take a break. And so we sat there and we just shot the shit, man. We were just throwing ideas. Like, what's your favorite movie? And you like, I remember one thing I said to him, I go, you like sports? And he goes, oh, I hate it. I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God. I thought I had to talk about football. And he just burst into laughter. He goes, I'm ready. I was like, okay. And so it's just that. And one of the gentlemen who I've become actual friends with, and we talk regularly, not just because I'm like, you okay? Are you alive? But I mean, just because this guy's a cool fucking guy, man. I was talking to him. He goes, I'm starting to get some really bad anxiety. I said, okay, I'll stop. Done. Let's just shoot the shit, man. What'd you have for dinner last night? And he's like, what? I was like, yeah, what'd you have for dinner, man? He's like, I had tacos. I was like, oh, you should have invited me over. And He just kind of relaxed, and boom, it changes.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
No, that's and as someone, like I've been getting more into documentaries over, the last few years, and I'm always curious because I've never made one myself. I'm
Mhm.
always curious, especially with a topic as sensitive as this, how you get people to relax, and it makes total sense. You make them feel like they're talking to a friend that they
Yeah,
can confide in.
exactly. And every man that I spoke to about this, I sent them the documentary. They were all very, very happy. And one gentleman who was crying during the interview, I followed up with him like before the film came even out. I followed up with him. I was like, and the part where I was just like, "I'm your cheerleader. I'm here." I didn't. That was fucking. That was not fucking bullshit, man. I mean, that was the fucking truth. And I contacted him at the. I interviewed him on Tuesday. I wrote him on Friday. I was like, "Man, I'm checking in. Your brother from America's checking in. How you doing?" He's like, "I'm doing okay. I'm doing a lot better. Thank you. It means a lot to me." I was like, "Not a problem." I was like, I meant that when I was like, if you're a man in that situation, call me, contact me, let's talk, man.
Yeah,
Let's figure this shit out. You're not alone. You're not weak. What can we do to help you? It's and just as we were saying before about the division, it's like you're not going to look at someone who's homeless and be like, I don't like their shoes. I'm not going to give them money. No, they're in need. Take care of them.
hmm yeah. I mean, that's what we should do as a human race. We should lift each other up.
Yes, exactly. It's not that fucking difficult. If someone's hurting and you see something you can do and there's an opportunity, you help them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of us now are just so wired to kind of automatically get defensive. Like, I mean, about this documentary, you said you're not making it to create division,
No,
but it's almost like we're trained to assume division, that this is okay. Well, this isn't made for me, so it's bad. Like,
yeah,
no, this is just to make you aware of an issue that is not talked about. Because what drew me to this immediately was that this is a topic that is not talked about nearly as much.
no,
Because a lot of us, a lot of us men are taught to internalize everything, and then we drive ourselves crazy because we're taught not to talk about it.
yeah,
So we turn to booze, we turn to drugs, or worse.
yeah. I mean, we go down that rabbit hole because we can't open up. And all it takes, and I've been there, it takes a couple of vulnerable moments to share with someone that you love and trust for them to turn around and use it against you one time. Like, oh, remember the time you cried over blank? It's just like, yeah, man, I was having a bad fucking day. I'm sorry. My boss yelled at me. My manager got on my ass in HR1 to see me over some bullshit. Yeah, I'm in a bad fucking mood. It's like, and then all the stress just came out and I cried. It's just like, well, don't hold that over me. And I think as men, it's like, be strong, be a leader, and be this. It's like, yeah, but I still need a break, man. We all sleep. We all get
Yeah,
tired. We all have bad days. Just because I have a lot of testosterone sure as hell doesn't mean that I don't need a good fucking cry once in a while.
yeah, it's therapeutic.
Yes. Oh my God. I love it. There's times I'll throw stuff on just because I'm like, I need a good cry, man. I got to let it out. And I'll throw something on. I'm like, oh man, that hit hard. Great. Back to it. Go.
Yeah, you would be surprised how much of a relief it is to do that. Like,
Oh,
you will feel like a huge, like 300-pound weight has
yeah,
just been lifted right off your shoulders,
that's
and
true.
you feel like you can conquer the world
Yeah.
after that.
And I think a lot of men are afraid to share that with other men. And in fact, just like probably an hour before I was on Twitter, and there was this beautiful video of a gentleman driving in his car, and he's like, I can't believe this. My daughter just won 4 awards in school, and he starts crying. And his first go to with pride in his beautiful daughter is he's like, I'm not weak. I'm not, you can call me what you want. I'm proud. These are proud tears. And it's like, that's your first place to go to the second those tears come. It's like, that's not good. And it's not him, it's society. So I get that.
Yeah. No, it's how we've been told to think.
Exactly.
No, that shouldn't be the case.
No. And that's what keeps these men in this abusive closet. And this is what kept me in there. That's what kept me hidden. I was ashamed. I talked to friends every single day. Nobody had any idea. Only one person, besides before this doc, only literally one other person knew this whole story. And, you know, this because I was ashamed.
Yeah, and I get that feeling too, and something that I haven't disclosed on the podcast, and like longtime friends will know, when I was in college, like up until that point, I had never really been in an actual relationship before.
Right.
And then I met this girl in one of my classes, and we started seeing each other. And first several months were great, and the first vacation we went on together, it was like a whole different person came about.
Yep.
And I was ridiculed for everything, tried to essentially take my life away.
Right.
So it basically, like, she would never want to hang out after that, but if I wanted to hang out with friends, that was a problem. So this documentary kind of, it reminded me of how far I've come personally. And I know people have been in way worse situations than me, but it still reminded me, of how far I've come and how much I've matured as a person.
Well, I'm proud of you. It's not easy.
Thank you.
Not only is it not easy to go through that, it's not easy to reflect on that. I mean, it's a struggle, and it is very, very, very difficult. I mean, if you see the outtakes from the end of the film when I tell my story, when I go, this is really fucking hard, man. That was not an exaggeration. Like,
I can imagine.
Oh yeah. I mean, I literally put that off till the last second. I'm like, get me the wine. I'm going to sit there. I'm going to fucking figure this out. I'm going to do it. And once it was done, I was like, oh my God, I need a nap, a shower, and a cigar, something. But no, but in all seriousness, I'm proud of you. And don't ever worry about comparing it to like, well, I shouldn't complain because my situation wasn't that bad. But it's just like alcoholics. If you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, it's just like, yeah, for a long time, I couldn't imagine skipping a bottle of wine a night. And it's just like, yeah, well, I started with a fifth of whiskey before breakfast. It's like, it's not a race. It's not a competition.
Right.
And all being in college, you're still young, barely out of teenagehood. You know what I mean? You're still growing and developing and processing and all this stuff. That can hit you really fucking hard. I mean, my first girlfriend committed suicide in high school. And that caused me to have a savior complex for years. And you'd be like, yeah, but it was high school. It was ages ago. I won't say how long ago, because you never ask a lady her age. But you go back all that time, but it still has an effect, man. It still hits you, and you still carry that with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I carried that with me for a long, long time, and that was 15, almost 20 years. Well, yeah, closer to 15 years.
Yeah.
And it messed me up mentally for a long time because I had this expectation that I was always the problem with everything. So it was almost like I would set myself up for failure and ruined a lot of opportunities because of it.
No, it's true. And you find yourself apologizing more than you should. You're like, you don't have to apologize that much because you forgot to take the trash out. Just take the trash out. Sorry. It's like, that's not healthy. That's either upbringing as a child or that's early relationship influence that crystallized within you and then had a negative effect on your future, not only view of relationships, but how they manifest.
Mm-hmm. No, yep. Yeah. It's like you're in my past self's head right now.
Been there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So mentioning you telling your own story at the end of the documentary, and I loved that, we talked about the style in which you made the documentary. I think it was the perfect choice for yours to just be static shot, no major like alterations or anything. It felt raw and real. And when I saw you sit down, that was when I was like, holy shit. And then, in the phone conversations or the conversations that you had recorded,
yeah,
like it wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt like I was there. experiencing it, and I'm just like, damn. That, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through that.
Oh,
That's no one, male or female, deserves to be talked to like that.
no, and I agree. And just as I said before, and thank you for what you said, and just as I said before about the divisive issue, it's not something to sit here and well, what about? It's like, no, it's not a what about situation. Okay. And I think there's so much division in this country, and it's just getting worse and worse between
Mm-hmm.
politics. I mean, this fucking election, man, holy fuck. Whoever
Oh man.
wins, holy shit, whoever fucking wins this election, just have some canned soup and a bug out bag because I don't know what the fuck is going to happen. Like it's crazy, but there's so much division going on right now. We don't need more of it, especially in regards to people being hurt. We're not talking DC Marvel, we're not talking Herzog Tarantino. We're talking about serious life death issues, and we don't need that kind of division. And we've got men and women who are desperate for a safe place. And it's just like men have to get over that hurdle and reach out. And doing that filming at the end in my office, setting it up, I was like, okay, 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 all right. I was like, yeah, okay, boxing, I got this. And I finally sat down and did it. But no, it was pretty raw. But going through the old footage that I had recorded, that was kind of the tough part. I'm like, oh, okay, I've watched one clip. I can take a break now. It still hurts, man. It's been
Oh yeah.
5 years, and it's still fresh. It's still fresh.
Yeah, the I don't think it ever doesn't feel fresh because it's almost like you're reliving it.
Yeah.
But I applaud you tremendously for making something like this because, as I mentioned in the interview with Jeffrey Morgan, who did the documentary about Jay, you don't learn about how to fix a problem unless you talk about it.
True.
Like issues like these, people are worried about politics and how many views they get on TikTok or YouTube, and there's some real serious stuff going on. Like I feel like the mental health is at an all-time low
Oh,
right now.
absolutely. And I think it's the urgency through, and I'm trying not to sound like a boomer that's like, oh, well, technology, kids with their iPhones today. But at the same time, it's like, if you look at the urgency of things and how fast things are moving, and 140 characters, 6-second clips, it's just this ADHD kind of, brrr, and there's no moment of calm. And I think the minute we stop talking, the minute you stop really sharing and talking with other people you disagree with, or the minute you try to silence someone that you disagree with, I think that's when fanaticism comes in, radicalism, and the fact that I've used this example. I've been interviewed before and talked to people because I'm a huge, like, I would get First Amendment tattooed on my arm if I could. Like, that's how I am a firm believer. Man, I love the First Amendment. And people are like, well, would you support the KKK marching on Martin Luther King's Day in Alabama? And I'd be like, you bet your ass I would. It's like, but why? It's like, it's the First Amendment. They have a right to march. And the greatest part of it all, you're going to see 8 Klansmen and 900 protesters saying, fuck you. It's like, that's America.
Yeah.
That's the point of it. The First Amendment was not created for discussions, arguments, ideas that we naturally agree with all the time. It's for ideas that need to be in the marketplace so that people can make their own decisions. Otherwise, you have tyranny. So yes, I support that. Just as I support Black Lives Matter marching. It's freedom of expression. I support the burning of the flag, even though it makes me sick to my stomach. And that because I'm a firm believer in all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of going back into the, I want to say the pre-production side of the documentary things, but once you were leading up to it, did you have a certain, like, did you say you want to get like X number of men to talk, or was it going to be, did you want to focus on specific, like shorter, like smaller number of people talking, but maybe more lengthy stories or more impactful stories?
I was definitely going for that because I didn't want to turn this into a Ken Burns 10 part series. No one's going to
Right.
watch that. And my target number, I know it's like the standard is hour 30, but fuck you. I'm going to do however long I want. But I think an hour long is solid because you hear the story. There was no, I put those guys in there because they were my jewels. Man, I heard their stories. I was like, you got to be in this. There were people I desperately wanted into this, and they couldn't do it. They were excited, and they're like, I'm sorry, I can't talk about this. There was a trans man who reached out to me and
Oh,
said
wow.
that he's been in an abusive situation with a woman. And I said, and he said, he's like, would you be interested in hearing my story? I couldn't type fast enough. My keyboard almost burnt. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And he was great. He was like, thank you for being inclusive. I said, of course, I want to hear your story. And missed two of our interviews, and then ghosted me. And it just broke my heart because I was like, that's the story I want too, because it's not just heterosexual couples, it's gay, straight, bi, all across the spectrum. And so, but everyone in there, they had their gems. There were some men I spoke to, or some men that wrote me and told me their stories where I'm just like, yeah, it's not abuse. It's like, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. But I wanted the compelling stories that had heart and really about overcoming. And it was tough to edit this. I'm not going to lie. This is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to edit because I would work on it and it's so close to home. But
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is kind of when you're in the post-production side of things, because this is something that's so close to your heart and something that you've been through, it reminds me of when I had a close friend who was killed in a car accident.
Sorry.
Thank you. A little over a decade ago, and we put together a tribute video for him where we talked about, his life. It was just, kind of like your standard talking head interview type video.
Right.
And once I started editing, I had to walk away from it because it just hit so close to home. So I can only imagine that was that kind of what you did. You just had to work on it in pieces and then kind of put yourself back in it.
Yeah, there were times I definitely had to take a break, and I will say I'm prone to migraines, but I take various things to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think the week it went live 2 weeks ago, I think I had 3 migraines in 1 week because the
Oh
stress,
my God.
tension of working on this. Once it was live, I literally collapsed because it just took like everything out of me. So if anyone has any doubts that this is, it's like, well, maybe it's not real. No, this is not smart camera angles. No, I'm not Michael fucking Moore. Fuck him. I'm not tweaking with little edits. It has nothing to do with politics. I just despise his work. But no, it was a very intense experience. But I'm very, very thankful I did it. And yeah, so it was a lot.
You should be proud of it.
Thank you.
I think it's something that needs to be talked about. And the only way we're going to learn from it and improve is if we talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I agree with you. It didn't need to be an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's you can sit down for an hour and it's nice and concise. The stories are compelling. It definitely conveys that in addition to your own story with the footage you used.
Right.
It packs a punch throughout the whole. I think it's 58 minutes.
Yeah, it's
like right under an hour.
Yeah,
It tells a great. I won't say great story because I don't want to say that it's like abuse is great, but I think it sends a great message that this needs to be talked about.
No, I agree. And I mean, not great story in the sense of like this is something to be celebrated, but great story as in like this is compelling, this has a story to it, this has weight to it, and this is something that should be discussed, and it's not being discussed. And why is it not being discussed? Which I kind of bring up into the film itself. And I think it's definitely an important story that has to be told. And I don't see anything happening as a change anytime soon. I mean, my only hope is that something with this film does. Someone sees it and shows it to the right person. That's what I wanted to do with the whole thing. I want someone to see this and go, blank needs to see this. And somehow there's a change. There's a greater opportunity for men out there that are in difficult situations, not to take away from where women are in their place, but to add to the opportunities for men. And that to me is true equality. You're not subtracting from the availability of services and places for women and children to be safe, but you're adding to what men need.
We as a society should always strive to improve
Agreed.
on all aspects of it, from whether it's abuse to women or men, whether it's racial issues, all of it. Like, we should all lift each other up,
I
and we
agree.
should make each other better.
And we should listen to people. And
Yes.
and the important thing is to entertain a thought. There's nothing wrong with entertaining a thought, even though you don't accept it. You can sit there and say, "Huh, I get what you're coming from. I don't agree, but I see why you feel that way." And I saw a great documentary about Kirkpatrick, the football player. Again, I'm so ignorant of football, and him kneeling during the national anthem. And I was like, I'll watch any documentary. I'll watch a documentary on bluebonnets. I don't give a shit. It's like, tell me more about your bluebonnet paintings. I'm fascinated. I don't know what it is. But I watched that and I was like, I get that, man. I respect that. Okay. I wouldn't do it, but you do. And I'm glad I live in a country where you can do that. Because if you don't and you're made to do that, that's forced patriotism, which is fascism. Fuck you. That's not happening.
Yeah, no, I know which documentary you're talking about. I haven't seen it, but I should check that out. But that's what's so great. That's what's so great about documentaries, is that we can learn and improve as a human race through telling stories through documentaries, because they're real. But you can tell great stories in a narrative, fictitious setting. It's been done in the past, and it will continue to be done so. But there's just a certain realness about documentaries, like a certain rawness. Like, you feel like you're experiencing life through documentary.
And that's why I love them so much. It's my number one film to watch, because when you think about it, you look at ancient man, and Homo erectus, Australopithecus africanus, they're sitting by the fire, and it's the birth of tools, and it's the birth, and it's the birth of leaving the nomadic lifestyle and actually becoming centered and focused. And then what do you do when you sit around a fire? What do we do when we sit around a fire today? We tell stories. And what did ancient man do? We sat around a fire, and in the middle of this, our brains are evolving and growing and developing, and we're developing tools, and then we tell a story. And you think of some ancient language and some ancient people saying, what are those stars? And it's like, well, let me tell you a story. That's a documentary of not only spirit, but the world. And it's told by an elder. And so in this case, you have the same thing with documentaries. Documentaries tell that story, that it's an ancient bloodline timeline that's just sort of manifested into absolute beauty and mythology. I mean, it's straight out of Joseph Campbell. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a way, it makes documentaries kind of the oldest form of storytelling.
Exactly.
It's just back then, they weren't filmed, obviously, but documentaries tell stories. Ancient civilizations told stories. We find it in, writings, throughout the decades and decades and centuries.
Exactly.
So, and I think documentaries will continue to evolve. And that's something that I'm excited about, like, what's going to happen with documentaries in 10 years, what stories are going to be told over the next 10 years, because I think the more stories like this are told, then it will make other filmmakers brave enough to talk about topics that need to be talked about.
Agreed.
Because documentaries and films are a great way to reach people, because most people like movies, and people like shows. It's the perfect means to do it, because you can see, like in your case, when you included the footage of your previous relationship, you can see the impact that it has.
Yeah. And I agree. And I mean, that's the importance of it. It is an ancient line of storytelling, and it's just now manifested with technology. Now, where will that technology go? How will AI affect that? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I know AI has a long way to go. It's come a long way, but it's got a long way to go to do something as compelling or, wipe out animation altogether. It's not happening yet. But who knows? it's hard to say as technology changes. I mean, you've got cell phones that are able to capture footage that was unimaginable 20 years ago. And so we just have to wait and see. It's really a timeline, but a meeting place of storyline and technology.
Absolutely. So as we start to wrap up here, where can people watch the documentary?
And just go to YouTube, just look up Frausun, Frausun, or go to my website, kurtzfrausun.com. You can check it out there. And I love fielding questions. I haven't gotten hate mail in 2 weeks. So, hate mail's fine. Just send it my way. But no, I mean, that's the best way to watch it. And I always love answering questions. If anyone has questions or wants to know feedback or needs help themselves, I've made some great contacts through this film that I've actually been able to help 3 friends who reached out to me after the film and said, don't tell anyone, but here's my story. And I'm like, this is the guy to talk to. I've got a good contact to help you. So yeah, I just want to help people. I want to tell people stories because I think that to me is the key to immortality. Not for myself, but for other people. There's documentaries now that in 100 years we're still going to be watching, and everyone that made it and was a part of it is long gone.
Absolutely. Well, Kurtz, thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. Thank you for making this documentary. I think it's very important. It's one of the most important pieces of cinema that I've watched in a long time, and look forward to seeing what you do next.
I'm honored, Derek. Thank you very much. It was great to catch up with you. And thank you for giving me this chance.
Thanks again to Kurtz Frausun for that amazing conversation and really powerful conversation. Be sure to check out his website, kurtzfrausun.com, and his documentary, Men Behind Closed Doors, Stories for Survival. I'll include links to both those in the show notes. For next week's episode, I'm going to be talking with a former screenwriter turned author and entrepreneur, Aurora Winter. And we get into, her filmmaking past as a screenwriter and a producer, but also she's currently working on getting one of her books adapted to the television screen. So we're going to be talking about that and other life stuff as well. It seems like that's kind of become the recurring theme on this podcast, is how film can help solve real life issues. And we have a great discussion about life, about film, writing, all the above. Definitely come back and check out that fun and informative episode. But until then, you guys know the drill by now. If you want to check out past episodes of this show, if you want to go back and check out my former show, The Derek Diamond Experience, everything is in one convenient location, linktree.com/realwisdompod. That's REEL Wisdom Pod. If you want to follow me on social media, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, everything is there as well. linktree.com/realwisdompod. And of course, please rate and review the podcast. The more reviews and ratings the show gets, the more visible it becomes to those that are searching for podcasts like this, filmmaking podcasts. It really does help, and it doesn't cost anything. And I'm going to throw this out there as we end this show. If you leave a review on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast, if you listened, because I do check every week to see if I've gotten any new reviews, if you leave one, I'll read it on next week's show. How about that? You'll get a shout out if you leave me a review about the podcast. That's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you once again to Kurtz Frausun. I am Derek Diamond, and we'll see you guys back here next week for another awesome episode of Real Wisdom with Derek Diamond.